Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Cullen Joyce. I'm an Insight Fellow at the Contemplative Studies Centre at the University of Melbourne. I'd like to start the session with an acknowledgement of country. Presently, I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, Sydney. I'd like to pay my respects to their continual custodialship of the land, pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay my respects to any Indigenous people who might be attending today, and just pay my respects to all the Indigenous communities and cultures of the different places which all our speakers are coming from. Today we have a short conversation between John Dupuche and Cyprian Consiglio. John Dupuche is a board member of the Contemplative Studies Centre and an associate professor and lecturer in spirituality and interfaith relations at the University of Divinity. Cyprian Consiglio is a Benedictine, Camaldolese Benedictine priest who is an expert in interfaith relations and a well-known singer, as well as a skilled writer on Christian spirituality. This is a short event, short conversation between them as a prelude to a larger, more detailed discussion which will take place on the 13th of November, which will be live at the Contemplative Studies Centre, which will provide the details of for you soon, which Cyprian will be having a longer conversation with another person. So I look forward very much to the conversation today, and see you at the end.
Thanks, Cullen, and good to see you again, Cyprian, after many years. As we can tell, you're a monk. You're wearing the garb of a monk there, so it's a giveaway, isn't it? And but tell us now, if you wouldn't mind, why did you become a monk, and in what ways has it been a fulfilling life for you as a monk? Big questions there, but it's good to know a bit about you because, interesting.
Yeah, I had been a boy seminarian. I was in seminary when I was 15 for 3 years, really a marvelous experience, one of the last high school seminaries in America. At the end of that period, I had a pretty profound conversion experience, I'll call it. I was pretty dedicated to the spiritual life. Wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, though I wasn't really attracted to diocesan priesthood. I wound up spending a year living with a Franciscan community who lived poor with the poor in uptown Chicago, and then did one more year of seminary and then left. I had a really powerful experience, but it all kind of fell apart in my 20s. That's an important point because I spent my 20s basically working as a professional musician for all those years, studying music, recording music, composing, performing. And I had a kind of awakening of a desire again for religious life in my late 20s, early 30s. Looked around, tried seminary again. Again, it didn't work out. And then after a year and a half in seminary, I left and was pointed toward this monastery in Big Sur and visited for the first time in 1991. And probably from the first minute I walked onto the property, just fell in love with the place. And the reason that original experience is so important is that I tasted something there at that monastery in Big Sur that I hadn't tasted since I was 19, 20 years old. There was that spiritual energy. Sometimes in Italian, they talk about it as a tension, a spiritual tension that was there. Something about the simplicity of the life, the nice combination in our life anyway, between solitude and community, between individual prayer and communal prayer. So I really didn't have much of an idea of being a monk until I joined that monastery, that hermitage in Big Sur. It's been fulfilling just in the sense that I was remembering an old monk told me once when I was first, I think maybe a postulant, maybe a novice. He said, "This life won't necessarily give you everything, but it won't keep you from doing anything." And that I found that to be true. You know, it hasn't necessarily been the place that has had every one of the gifts that I needed, but it never stopped me from pursuing what I wanted, at least our brand of Camaldolese Benedictine monasticism. So yeah, I could say it's been a very, very fulfilling life for me. I've been a monk now going on 33 years.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, you mentioned about the Benedictine tradition, which is very ancient, of course. Could you tell us a bit about what do Benedictine monks do? What's the daily ritual? What do they do, these monks, you know? It's a big question and sort of, yes.
People ask that question all the time. What do they do all day? Benedict is known for his very moderate rule. We're talking about the late 5th, early 6th century, when there were various different types of monasticisms going on in Italy, especially where Benedict himself was from. He came up with a rule that was based on some older teachings and some older rules that was pretty balanced in its way. It kept together essential elements of the life. The motto of the Benedictines is not completely true. It's ora et labora, which is prayer and work. But actually, one of the great Benedictine scholars of the 20th century used to really insist there should be a third thing in there, which is studia. It's a balance between prayer, study, and work. It's very much intentionally a community life built on the gospel, built on gospel values, with this nice scansion of prayer, work, and study. All three of those things were very important to St. Benedict in that way. As I say, the way the Benedictine rule, the way the rule of Benedict is laid out, it's mostly for the communal life and very set regulations for how the communal life should be lived. And the rules and regulations are mainly to protect, the peace of that life. I come from a congregation called the Camaldolese Benedictines, and we're considered a reform from the 11th century, where our founder's name was St. Romuald, added this other dimension in that didn't really have too much of a container in Benedictine monastic life, and that is solitude. St. Romuald himself was really known mainly for himself living as a hermit most of the time, even though he was a reformer of both monasteries and hermitages and founded both monasteries and hermitages. And besides that, some of Romuald's earliest disciples were also missionary martyrs. So I put all three of those things together. And for our particular congregation, we call that the triplex bonum, the threefold good of solitude, community, and this third good, which we actually don't like the name, but in its origin, it was missionary martyrdom. Not just martyrdom, not just missionary work, but missionary martyrdom, this kind of self-donation to God. Now, none of those things are completely unknown in the Benedictine tradition. They're all there somehow, but our congregation puts like all three of those in kind of an equal footing in high relief.
Moving on from that, could you tell us a bit about the spiritual, well, you mentioned spirituality of the monks in the sense of prayer and work and study. What do they hope to gain by doing those things? What's the long-term aim, you might say, of monastic life, moving on from the details? What's the hope that each monk has?
Depends on what verb you'd want to use for this. I'm going to use my verb for it, and I would say it's a realization of our union with God through Christ. People might say achieving union with God or seeking union with God. The verb that I like the most there is realizing union with God. And another way I describe it sometimes is a communal life that leads to contemplation, and also a communal life that flows from contemplation, like to put together a life that's based on that experience. It's kind of post priori instead of a priori, you might say. It's not just we're putting a life together to make us contemplatives. We're contemplatives, so this is the kind of life we would live. You see what I'm saying? And not to forget that, Benedict is really, only 400, 500 years after Jesus. So really in the era yet of the church fathers, not that far from apostolic times, considering how far away we are from it. And I think sometimes what doesn't get mentioned enough for my taste, especially when we're talking about interfaith things and the commonality between different traditions and different monastic traditions, he really considered this to be a way to live out the gospel.
Yes,
Monasticism is a response to this conversion experience of Jesus. not, I mean, we have a universal, obviously, universal basis of monasticism and contemplative life. But Benedict really was coming from that point of view. He saw this as a way of living out the gospel.
Yes, that's so interesting. Of course, as you say, the benefit for you is immense because it has brought about closeness, that deep satisfaction of closeness. But what might have been some of the difficulties and challenges that face a person like yourself who is seeking to live a monastic life in keeping with the gospel? I mean, it's not always roses and honey, is it? So what could be the challenges that a typical monk might face in their prayer life?
Quite often people teasingly and half-truth refer to monastic life as somehow an escape from real life. Now, I spent 10.5 years as superior of my community, as prior of our community. And it's a little village. It's real life. We have bills to pay. We have people who sit next to us and inquire with bad breath. We have sicknesses. We have employees. It's real life. I mean, probably I would say the biggest challenge, we take about stability, which means this kind of commitment to the community. The biggest challenge is that fidelity to the community when in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. So that can never be discounted, like what a big element that is to our life. The other challenge, I think, is dryness. The ancient monks would call it acedia or acedia, this kind of torpor, just kind of drifting along in kind of an agreement of, let's not grow anymore, let's not be challenged anymore. But that could be, of course, the temptation in anybody's life. But in the monastic life, you could really sink into a comfort, like in the nest of your cell or the nest of the community, and not move forward. So that's a challenge. I would say those would be the two biggest ones.
Right. And so you found great happiness then in your prayer life within all the challenges. There's been happiness for you.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to one of our young monks yesterday here. There was there's a Black preacher in America who had this great saying, the main thing is to make sure that the main thing stays the main thing. And I was explaining to him, like, no matter what comes and goes, remember the main thing is that life of prayer. I mean, that for me has been the absolute joy of this life, of this path. And that's something that just grows broader and deeper all the time. Yeah.
Yes. Well, this whole question of growing broader and deeper introduces now the next aspect of your life, a big one, which is this whole role that you have in interreligious dialogue. There's been a massive involvement of the monks generally, but Benedictines in particular, with the interreligious dialogue between Buddhist monks, Christian, Catholic monks, but even other traditions as well. So the whole role of interfaith dialogue, and now you've taken on a big role in that regard internationally to promote, you might say, this whole dialogue between religions. Could you speak a bit about what is your role now that you've taken up just recently?
I've been asked to be the Secretary General of an international organization known as Monastic Interreligious Dialogue. It's actually known by both the French and the English name, goes by the acronym DIMMID, Dialogue Interreligieux Monastique, excuse my pronunciation, Monastic Interreligious Dialogue. It's international in the sense that we have commissions all over the world, particularly in America and Europe, but very active, I'm told. I'm just getting into the job now myself, in Africa and Asia in these days as well, and a little bit in South America. My own background in this, I mean, I get referred to every now and then as an expert, but I just do not feel like I'm an expert in anything. But it's been a major part of my monastic life almost from the very first day I entered, because I had the great grace of meeting Father Bede Griffiths. As I was entering the community, I hadn't even officially joined yet. I was just there on my observership. And Father Bede was on his last trip in America back to India, and then eventually 9 months later where he died. And I heard him speak one Saturday morning, and I had about a 30-second conversation with him after that talk, and that absolutely set the pace for everything in my life from there on out, my monastic life, my study, my work, and everything. And Bede had this notion, what he called universal wisdom, that the traditions could learn from each other, that the authentic spiritual traditions could learn from each other. He was, in philosophy, what we would call a perennialist, but he was very much a Christocentric perennialist. This is a phrase I got from another scholar who used it, and it's very accurate for him. He thought there was something really decisive about the Christ event, but that did not impinge him at all from learning from other traditions. Of course, he himself, after his first years of monastic life in England, was in India from 1955 until his death in 1993. He was one little Benedictine foundation in Bangalore, and then he founded with a Belgian Trappist monk a place called Kurusamala in Kerala. He was there for 10 years, and then became like the third founder, you might say, of our ashram in South India called Shantivanam. I say our ashram because eventually he brought himself and the whole community under our congregation, the Camaldolese congregation. And from there, he really became one of the world's leading voices in interreligious dialogue and in this idea of the universal wisdom. So that kind of set the pace to my whole monastic life. As I was studying, monastic history and the history of Christian mysticism and Christian prayer, I could even picture myself sitting in my cell as a postulant, piles of books around me. I was also reading everything that Bede wrote. And then, first of all, because we had such a close relationship with a Zen, Soto Zen, Japanese Soto Zen Buddhist community in California, my prior said if I was interested in this, I should concentrate on Buddhism. So I was kind of putting myself through a history of Buddhism at the same time. So my whole formation and education has been kind of parallel, learning East and West at the same time. Wound up doing my master's thesis also on a comparative anthropology of Hinduism and Christianity. Again, all based on Bede's thought. And that's 33 years later.
So really, there's a real danger, I think, in people following a path. They can end up being in a silo, each following their path and not learning from each other. So what is the advantage, do you think, of one tradition learning from another tradition? Is it useful, or is it a danger? Is it a temptation?
I think it can both be useful and a danger, but I think the use outweighs the danger if you have the right formation for it. I want to say, Houston Smith is the great scholar of world religions, had this great framing device. There's devotional, there's practical, and there's philosophical. He might have used other words for that. And the philosophical one has been the one that's interested me the most. I have to admit, the devotional part of it, I don't know that much about the devotional life of a lot of other faiths, but I've really been fascinated by the philosophy and the anthropology within which those faiths have been held. Because
you've learned a lot in that regard. Then you've learned that has improved your own prayer life, has been improved as a result.
Well, I would say my intellectual life has been improved by the philosophical approach to it, being able to express the truths of our faiths in other ways other than Greek European ways. And Bede and Abhishektananda before him were just brilliant at this. But the other part of it, the practical part, is also something that's been affirmed by the church that one can do, is learning other ways actually to build our spiritual practice. Like there are some things that have been developed in the Asian traditions that just never were developed in Western Christianity. For example, your own expertise in Kashmir Shaivism. I know we have a kind of a bridge there. One day I was sitting somewhere trying to meditate, but trying not to look too obvious. And somebody asked me, he's an Asian man, he says, "Are you meditating?" And I said, whatever. I said, "Yes, I've been meditating for some years now." And he said to me, it's a great question. He said, "Are you more influenced by Buddhism, by Hinduism, or by Taoism?" Most people wouldn't even know to ask that question. And I answered him, well, the Buddhists taught me how to meditate. They taught me what to do with my mind, but it's India taught me what to do with my body. And the Taoism for me really gives me the poetry and the philosophy that I just love in so many ways. So I would say that's one of those things The Buddhist tradition, the mechanics of meditation, we have nothing like it in Christianity.
What do you think the Christian whole view might add or contribute to the meditation experience?
The main thing I keep pointing that I think I have this phrase in my head, the great conversation. One of the things that Christianity, maybe the main thing, the principal thing I think Christianity has to offer the conversation, first of all, is the incarnation. This is so unique.
You might need to mention what incarnation means. It might not be familiar words to everyone.
Well, the beginning of the Gospel of John, that the word, the intelligence, the Tao, the Sophia of the universe was made flesh. That word was God, the word was with God, the word was God, and the word was made flesh. In a sense, I mean, from my understanding of Greek philosophy, this would have been a scandal to the Greeks.
So made flesh, that is Jesus, is the incarnate word of God then.
Yeah. And yes, this is a claim that nobody else makes it in quite that way. There are avatars, but there's not an incarnation like we claim Jesus is. This specific moment in history when as Paul describes Jesus, the fullness of divinity dwelled in this human being, the fullness of divinity in that way. And specifically because God wanted that. That was part of the whole plan of history. So along with that comes is respect for the body, for the flesh, and for matter in general, that again, I don't see in any other tradition outside of the tantric, wings of both yoga and Buddhism. And also an appreciation of history goes along with that history is not just an illusion or an accident. History is actually a sacrament. It's what, the divine plan is using to work something out for us. So I think there's lots that flow from this idea of incarnation, along with our own version of non-duality.
I think we're tending to come to the end of our allotted time, Cyprian, unfortunately.
Just getting warmed up.
I know. That's the trouble with these interviews. They have a time limit on them. But I think you're going to be speaking later on in November, I think, and you'll take up some of these topics, some of these themes, particularly on the methods of meditation and prayer. Did you want to say anything more about that, or should Cullen introduce what is going to happen in November? I'm just very aware of the timing here because we do have a limited amount of time available.
Yeah, I think we've got a really nice program laid out. It'd be these same topics in a little bit deeper way, and I'll probably have the guitar with me. We'll do some singing and some meditating together as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Cyprian.
Thank you, John.